Hi, my name is Shae Beagle. I'm the illustrator on Moonstruck, a new series by Image, and I'm going to draw for you today. First, I kind of just try and figure out the size of things. You know, that helps to visualize what you're going to do within that space. So it helps to figure out, to have an idea. It just sounds kind of obvious, but sometimes just going right into it is not the best idea. You have to figure out what will fit within the space that you're given and what you can do with that composition-wise. And that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. I usually work in traditional, but I like the opportunity that digital gives you to move things around like I said I just do. If you're noticing, I'm like shrinking stuff down all the time because I just have the habit of making things too big and then having to rescale it. I guess I can start with I wasn't much of a reader when I was a kid, and I enjoyed stories and I enjoyed knowing things, but I had a hard time reading at the level I should have been reading, and I was always a little bit slow, so I was always discouraged just in general from reading until I kind of figured out that I liked looking at pictures a lot more than anything. And my grandfather had always given us these clippings from Peanuts comics, and it was cute because our last name, our family name was Beagle, and Snoopy's a beagle, so we would always joke about that and have the little comics around always. But I don't know. I kind of just happened to decide to make comics. When I was a teenager, started to read a lot of manga and stuff, and that brought it more into my world. Just the fact that there were more comics that weren't just funny pages. I didn't think I really decided to do comics for a living until I was well into high school. My teacher in high school, actually, I was doing an AP program, and she was she was older and was very much, if you don't draw realistically, then that's not art kind of thing. So I wanted to do a little story that I had been working on for my portfolio to apply into college and everything. And she was reluctant to let me do that, and it ended up that we had substitute for a large part of my senior year where I was doing this work. And it was nice because the substitute allowed me to do more cartoony things and more comics-based illustrations. So I had one illustration that I did that was kind of in 3 pieces, sort of like panels, and she was over the moon about that. She was really excited to see that I was kind of trying new things with the format, I guess. And it ended up doing really well in the AP program, I guess, and kind of brought me into doing more in comics and in the not so realistic art world, which was exciting because all through high school it was very much kind of bore into me that if it's not real, then it's not art. So I was excited about that and ended up doing more with it through college, and it was all very good. I enjoyed it a lot, and now I'm here. This is our main character from Moonstruck. This is Julie, and I don't know. She's a reader, so I decided maybe draw her reading some of her favorite books. But Moonstruck kind of started while I was still in college. There was a class called the Comics Practicum where we had to apply to this class, and they only took 10 students, I think. And of those 10 students that got accepted, 10 writers wrote into the class these little 5-page scripts for short stories that the students would collaborate with them on and be able to create an anthology eventually. The students self-published an anthology with these stories in them. So this was the second year that I was taking this class, and the way the process works is that the scripts we read have the writers' names removed from them. So we don't know who wrote what script until we vote on which ones we want and all that. So I was presented with all these scripts, and my top choice was one that was called Moonstruck. And I immediately fell in love with the story and the idea of it. It involved this girl named Julie, who was eagerly waiting to go on this this date that she had set up with this girl she finds online. And she's waiting in a coffee shop, and she's very anxious about the date. And while she's waiting for her date to arrive, one of the characters named Lindy, who is a bit of a bully, bursts into the coffee shop and tries to pick a fight with this other character who did not have a name at the time. He's now called Mark in the story, but in the script, which was one of the things that sold me on it, his name was Suckwank because he was a vampire, which I thought was hilarious. The entire time his name was just Suckwank. It went on to be, they got in a fight and ended up that Suckwank turns into a bat and tries to escape from Lindy's wrath. And in this, Lindy removes her hat that she's been wearing, and it's revealed that she's a Gorgon, and her snake hair is going everywhere, and it's causing a scene. And the barista, who has been sitting in the back behind the counter the whole time, comes out to break up the fight, and it turns out he's a centaur, and everything is just going crazy in the cafe, and Julie is freaking out, and she tries to break up the fight a little bit, but ends up getting her coffee spilled on her nice pretty dress that she's worn for this date. And she gets so upset by this that she wolfs out, and it's revealed that she's a werewolf. And everything is just going crazy, and finally her date arrives and sees everything in such disarray, and tables are flipped over and everything's spilled everywhere. And Julie immediately runs up to her and starts apologizing for, oh my gosh, I didn't mean for you to see me like this. This was supposed to be a good little first date. And her date, Selena, interrupts and just goes no, thank goodness, I'm a werewolf too. So this was the little 5-page story that we had, and it was such a cute little idea that started out from such a simple place. Grace would describe it as she just had to find a twist and then another twist to build on it within those 5 pages, is how Moonstruck originally started. My professor at the time, Lauren McCubbin, who's now our editor on the book, saw the potential of the story and was just so excited to get us to put together a pitch and get it out there and put together a first issue and whatnot, because the world was so big. There's so much that we could have done with it. Julie was described as someone who was very anxious for their first date, obviously. I kind of decided to make her kind of small and soft based off of that. Dressed up very nicely because she's very nervous and wants to make a good first impression. The other characters, Lindy, who comes in, is very much the exact opposite of Julie. She is big and broad and intimidating, very stone butch kind of, and very much emotionally the opposite of Julie as well as visually. And the only real descriptor that Grace had given me in the story was Lindy wears a hat, because that's part of her reveal. The barista, who at the time did not have a name, was just the barista, who's now named Chet, was to have a reveal that he was a centaur by coming out from behind the counter of the cafe, which was interesting to figure out visually because of the size of a cafe counter is not that tall to hide a horse. So I figured out, maybe a very short horse is behind this counter. And that ended up translating to, okay, Chet is a Shetland pony centaur. And that works. I could fit a Shetland pony behind a counter and make him look like a human. So that was kind of one of the visual challenges of the story. But I always, whenever I have a new influence, I guess, I try and take what I like from that influence and kind of incorporate it into what I already have. So I'm always very conscious of not just like imitating a person's work. Often only like certain things from a person's style, and I will just kind of incorporate those certain things. Do your own thing. It's endearing, when somebody is using your visual style kind of as a learning tool to figure out how to draw certain things that they maybe haven't been so confident in drawing before. But it's also, you have to keep in mind that that is not your journey is about. You have to take that and make it your own instead of taking someone else's work and trying to claim that as your own. In the first issue, I do all the colors, and I decided that was a very difficult thing to do because of, not even just because of time constraints, but because of preserving my hands, I guess. Always make sure to take care of your wrists. Please, please, please take care of your wrists. We have a new colorist for the second issue on, which is fantastic for me, but it's very good to have somebody else that can take and interpret your art. Often, if you're coloring your own work, you have an idea already of what you want to do, and then you have to kind of interpret that for somebody new, which can be difficult. But it's definitely something that I think people should learn. It's something that I didn't learn until we had actually gotten a colorist. I like to flat things out first, and I do a lot of layer masks and multiplies and overlays. I like to not use so much of the same palette every time. So depending on what color that multiply or overlay turns into, I kind of just try and work with it. So I guess it's more of an organic process. So I tend to use a lot more saturated or pastel colors depending. I tend to not go for darker palettes, or I try to keep things very complementary usually. So if I'm using a lot of warm colors for Julie, she's always dressed very warmly. I like to shadow her with a bit of purple, just to kind of contrast that. I don't want things to become too flat and one-dimensional in terms of colors. Visually, designing a character is much more than just, I guess, their shapes or their silhouette. Even though that's very important, it's also, you have to think about how this character would make themselves look based on their personality. So it wouldn't make sense for Julie to have a very, commanding presence because she has absolutely no desire to have that commanding presence. So I kind of keep that stuff in mind, and I try to give each character their own like visual style. So certain colors that they'll often wear, and certain clothing items that they'll go back to, just to give them a familiarity. For backgrounds, I usually just try to fit things into the space that I'm given. Make sure there's enough showing that it's readable what the place is. Again, like, I try not to get super complicated, because backgrounds can be very frustrating to anybody. Just having enough showing that, like, for example, having just pillows on a bed top by a window for this image, like, can show that she's probably in her room just hanging out and reading a book. Keep it simple and not overwhelm the image with unnecessary detail that could take away from your main point. I try not to I try to tell myself that's not me being lazy. That's the way that it works. And I very much have a layer for everything. It definitely makes it easier if you have to go back and do an edit. Like, say you need to bump something around, and or free up some extra space for, say, lettering or anything else. If you have it all on the same layer, you can move stuff, but then you might have a blank space that you need to fill in with more art, and you might have to go back and fix that junk. It's not fun. It ends up, I've found, for me, making things a lot easier in the long run. You're always going to be your own worst critic. You're going to see, you're going to be comparing what you make to the image you had in your head. And it's always going to be different. It's never going to be exactly what you envisioned, and it's never going to be everything that you want it to be. And when it is, that's awesome and cool, but it's very rare for that to happen. Learn that, you know, not everyone is seeing that image inside your head, and to them it's brand new and fresh and looks effortless. So it's, I guess, like, take it easy on yourself, because someone's gonna like it, and if you enjoyed making it, that's what matters.